I call Julianne Genter.
Mr. Speaker, far from condemning the bill, as Mr. Bishop was concerned that members opposite might be doing, I rise, of course, to speak in favour of the bill on behalf of the Green Party. It does make a number of very minor amendments that will make the tax system easier for ordinary New Zealanders every day to deal with. It will bring it back into the 21st century. I think Stuart Nash mentioned that earlier tonight, that this is the sort of riveting stuff that this bill does. It means that we can now use electronic signatures, get those automatic refunds a little bit earlier. The Commissioner can now receive emails. All of that has to be done, there's no question. And the Green Party is very happy to support that work in the House. But I will, of course, join with my Labour Party colleagues and no doubt New Zealand First in saying that this bill could be doing a lot more to make a substantial difference to New Zealanders. This sort of below-the-radar type amendments, they're necessary, but they're fundamentally not going to do anything to create a fairer New Zealand, a simpler, more transparent tax system. And all of that, it could be done. You know, the national government's made a lot of excuses for why we can't make those sorts of improvements to have a fairer tax system. They just say it can't be done. For example, we can't have a proper capital gains tax on investment properties, even though it's really clearly unfair that people who go and work hard 9 to 5 for a paycheck have to pay tax on their income. And those who are well off enough to own a couple of investment properties in Auckland can make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and not pay any tax on that income. It's unfair, it's inefficient, it's bad for our economy, it's bad for financial stability. The Reserve Bank has been talking about this for years now. Treasury has been talking about it for years. All that the national government managed to bring in during their term is this bright line test, which only applies to residential land and only applies to properties bought and sold within 2 years. And that was a very flawed piece of legislation, which really should have, well, I think we're going to see, the truth is that legislation won't have the impact that it needed to have to cool the housing crisis in Auckland. It certainly doesn't make the tax system fairer or simpler. It makes it much more complicated because it only applies to residential land. It doesn't apply for a long enough period of time to make a substantial difference. And of course, you know, this legislation, because we were working on it for such a long period of time, tidies up all sorts of bills that, you know, all sorts of laws that existed. It makes a whole lot of amendments and tidies up the tax law and takes the language seriously. If only that level of detail and work had been applied to the Bright Line test, which was clearly a half measure that National was forced to bring in at the last minute. And it's that kind of very last minute and, you know, just superficial approach to lawmaking, I guess that really typically represents this national government, because they're more interested in doing things around the edges, tinkering here and there, doing things for PR reasons to get the bump in the polls they need, but not actually addressing the substantive issues in our tax system that are long overdue for being addressed. Of course, this bill doesn't do anything to make our tax system more transparent, which is something the Green Party and I'm sure other opposition parties and most New Zealanders would like to see. I attempted to move an amendment in the committee stages of this bill that would have cleaned up and increased the transparency around foreign trusts.
The member can't refer to that because it was ruled out of order, so the member can't refer to it in a third reading.
Thank you,
Julianne Genter.
So this bill, of course, does nothing to improve the transparency around our foreign trusts, which is something that it well could have done. And I think that the national government is going to find they're really not on the side of public opinion when it comes to New Zealand being used as a tax haven. And it's because of this core value of fairness that New Zealanders have, and they would like to have a fair tax system. They would like to have legislation that ensures fairness, whether that's in New Zealand or overseas, and they probably don't think it's right that New Zealand's being used by wealthy foreigners to hide assets without having to declare any information.
I've brought to the members' attention that you can't refer to anything that's not on the third reading. This is a report back from the committee. And what the committee has reported back, that's what we're debating now. So the other information is out of order, and I'll ask the member to come back. Gillian Gender.
You know, it's quite difficult for the national government that people should hold them to account for what they're not doing in their legislation. And so they try to shut down opposition parties who would like to be able to speak about this. It's amazing the range of debate that's been allowed.
The member said that is an attack on the Speaker. And I would ask the member to be very careful. It's not the government that is making these decisions. I was the one who ruled out of order your SOP in the committee stage, not the government. I was the one who ruled it out because I was the presiding officer at the time. So that was a decision that I made. All right, and to bring that up now and to say that the government's involved in trying to do something underhand is not acceptable. So I just ask the member, come back to the bill, otherwise I'll have to terminate the speech. Julianne Gender.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Julianne Gender.
I just raised the point that we've heard about a wide range of topics related to tax in the previous speeches on this bill.
No, I've ruled, and you were here when I've brought other members to account for what they were doing and what they were saying, and I've mentioned the Speaker's rulings that are appropriate in this case, and in your case, you've been referring to matters that are completely outside the scope. I'm the presiding officer, the judgment is mine, and I've mentioned it to you on 2 occasions, and I'll ask the member in the final few minutes to actually concentrate. Third reading speech, it's what's reported back from the committee to the House. Julianne Gender.
One of the issues that hasn't been mentioned in this bill is the changes to KiwiSaver membership. The bill extends the provision for information sharing between Inland Revenue and KiwiSaver fund providers in relation to email addresses and address contact details. It extends that to phone numbers and also may provide a scheme provider with certain information, including the names of scheme members who have transferred out of their scheme and the name of the member's new provider and the names of the scheme provider's new members. I'm sure that people watching at home tonight will be riveted by this information in this bill, and they'll think it's quite important. Another important, incredibly important change that this bill makes is it allows members who have been incorrectly enrolled in KiwiSaver when they were minors to now opt out of KiwiSaver up until their 19th birthday. If they are under the age of 16, they must have the consent of one of their guardians, and if they're 17 or 18, they may withdraw without guardian consent. That's the type of monumental changes that are in this taxation transformation, first phase simplification, and other measures bill. But I would say that New Zealanders are actually facing much bigger issues today, such as inequality and climate change, and the tax system could go a long way towards addressing those issues while having broader economic benefits and making lives better for all New Zealanders. But we won't see that kind of change from this national government because they're protecting the status quo.
I call Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to